Welcome to Books and Books. My name is Ketsi and I'm part of the children's department here at Books and Books. Thank you all for joining us this evening, and thanks to our internet audience for tuning in with us. You're all in for a great treat tonight, so you can keep up with our events online, or for those of you who are here, you can pick up a calendar at a register so you can enjoy many more of our author events. For those of you online, if you'd like to purchase a book and have it personalized by Mr. Neal Shusterman, please call the number on your screen and we will ship it free to you wherever you are in the U.S. during this broadcast. We look forward to hearing from you. We are for tonight presenting Challenger Deep, which I'll show the picture, by Mr. Neal Shusterman, which is being called a tour de force, which grapples with reality and fantasy within the mind. We meet Caden Bosch, a brilliant young man who is slowly beginning to sense that something is not right. His friends begin to take notice as well. But juxtaposed to another scene where he also finds himself on a ship that is headed for the deepest point on Earth, Challenger Deep. Caden Bosch is torn between two worlds, the one where he should be, and the other, once lost, he may not be found. Shusterman navigates us through the perilous and fragmented world of Caden with meaningful metaphors and captivating images that lingers in our minds. We should thank Mr. Shusterman for his brave endeavor in giving us a mirror into a mind with someone with mental illness. I know I speak for myself that it takes courage to create such a personal and heartfelt story. This book is sure to open up the conversation about mental illness and shed a compassionate light on the individuals that have it. In the news, we are inundated with one-sided narratives that do not let us see from the individual suffering with mental illness. Critics and authors alike say that Challenger Deep is a deeply powerful and personal novel from one of today's most admired writers for teens. Laurie Anderson, award-winning author of Speak, calls Challenger Deep a brilliant journey across the sea of the mind, frightening, sensitive, and powerful, simply extraordinary. And with great anticipation, let's give a warm welcome to Mr. Neal Shusterman.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Challenger Deep started many years ago. I was working with my son on his second grade ocean report. Every second grader in his school had to do an ocean report, and some kids were doing them on dolphins and whales and sharks. My son wanted to do it on the Marianas Trench, the deepest place in the world. So we got a whole bunch of books, we started researching, and we discovered that the deepest spot of the Marianas Trench, 6.8 miles down, had a special name. They named it Challenger Deep. I thought that was a really cool name for the deepest place in the world. I thought it was also a very cool title for a book. So I had a book contract with I think it was Simon & Schuster at that time, that it was a 2-book contract. And I knew what the first book was going to be, but I didn't know what the second one was going to be. But they needed a title. So I said, how about Challenger Deep? And they said, okay, sounds good, what's it about? And I said, the ocean. And they slapped that title on the contract. I never had a story for it. And then when it came time to write the book, I think I wrote Full Tilt instead. But then the next time I had an open contract for an untitled book, I plugged Challenger Deep as a title in there. It became an inside joke with my publishers that this was a placeholder title. I never knew whether I'd have a real story to tell with that title. But then, when my son, the same son who did that report, was 16, he started developing anxiety. And the anxiety started to go beyond typical teen angst and anxiety. He started getting paranoid. He started believing things that weren't true. He started hearing voices. He started hallucinating. And he basically totally detached from reality. This was a very traumatic and difficult time for him and for our family. And we took him to the hospital, and he was hospitalized for several weeks and put on very heavy medications. And he was ultimately diagnosed with schizophrenia. And he was diagnosed with bipolar, then he was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder. You know, we put labels on mental illness, and we think just because we can put a label on it, we know what it is. But the thing is, all these names are labels on groups of symptoms, and no two people present exactly alike. He had 4 different diagnoses because 4 different doctors, called it what they felt it was. It seems to me that it's most likely, it's closest to schizoaffective, which is a combination of bipolar and schizophrenia. That when the mania gets so severe, it goes off into full-blown schizophrenia where you really can't tell the difference between what's real and what's not. And when he was in the depths of his illness, when he was really incapable of telling the difference between what was happening in the outside world and what was going on inside his mind, he looked up to me at this one moment. I'll never forget this moment. There was like this, he was so lost in there, and there was this one moment where you could see him. And it's as if he was looking out from this very dark place and said to me, "Dad, sometimes it feels like I'm at the bottom of the ocean screaming at the top of my lungs and nobody can hear me." And suddenly I knew what Challenger Deep was going to be about. But I waited. Couldn't write the story then. Couldn't even think of writing a book about this then, because he was in the depths. We were all in the depths with him. We were working with him to try to bring him back from that place. It took quite a long time. He had a couple of setbacks. He had a couple of lapses and a couple of other episodes. And right around the time that he turned 2021, he really started to pull out of it. We found medications that worked very well for him, and slowly, bit by bit, he started to be able to be functional again. And his mind really started to hold together. You know, he's a brilliant kid. You know, he's the only person I know who actually read Ulysses for fun. You know, and he did this just last year. Now he's 26 and he is in a much better place than he was. He's really back to who he used to be. But there's always the threat that it could come back. I mean, mental illness is not something that just goes away. It's something that's manageable. And many people don't realize that. You know, we keep it at such an arm's length. We see people who are mentally ill and we think, oh, that's who that person is. But that's not true. That might be who that person is at this moment in time, but they don't have to be that person. They can bring themselves back. They can get better. It's manageable. With the right medication, with enough support, anyone can be helped and brought back from the depths of mental illness. So it is a fallacy that once you're there, that's it for you. There's hope. And I wanted to talk about that hope. So when Brendan was feeling much better, when he was in a better place, I asked him, can I write a book about mental illness? Not about you, but we'll take things that have happened to you and we will put them in the book into this fictional story. We'll take things that happened to us as a family and weave it into the fiction. And I also asked him if I could use his artwork. When he was in the depths, when he was in the hospital, and also when he was at home, when he couldn't communicate, the only way he had to communicate was through artwork. And he would obsessively draw these wild, abstract line drawings as his only way of connecting with the outside world. And he did dozens upon dozens of them. And I looked at them, and they started to inspire a story. So I asked him if I could use his artwork to inspire the fantasy element of the story. Challenger Deep, basically, there are 3 different interweaving threads sort of braided together in Challenger Deep. There's the story of Caden Bosch, who is this teenager who is starting on this journey down into the depths of mental illness. It starts with paranoia and anxiety, and it goes further and further until he really, as my son did, loses touch with reality and has to be hospitalized. But running parallel to that is the story of the same kid on this journey, on this surrealistic, mystical journey across the Pacific Ocean on a pirate ship with this very colorful captain and his talking parrot and this whole cast of characters, including the figurehead of the ship, who talks to him and only him and gives him words of wisdom and prophecies. And they sail across the ocean toward Challenger Deep, pursued by monsters the entire way that don't want them to get there. The entire fantasy element of the story is inspired by the drawings that my son did. Also, the third thread of the story are observations on life that are kind of detached from the story, but very poignant for the story. So all of that woven together creates this very disjoint sort of puzzle that fits together Challenger Deep. It's intentional that it is kind of this disjoint puzzle. I want you to be putting the puzzle pieces together. I want you to feel disoriented like the character does. My hope is that when you get through the story, you're not going to be looking at mental illness from the outside in, which I've seen so many stories do. You're going to be looking at it from the inside out. You're going to come out the other end of the story feeling as if you have been through a psychotic episode with this character and understand what it's like. And hopefully you'll come out with a whole new sense of empathy and compassion and understanding for people who are mentally ill. I'd like to do some readings from Challenger Deep. The chapters are all very short, and a lot of them seem unrelated, but as you read on, they all start to connect. Chapter 1, Fee, Fi, Fo, Fum. There are two things you know. One, you were there. Two, you couldn't have been there. Holding these two incompatible truths together takes skill at juggling. Of course, juggling requires a third ball to keep the rhythm smooth. That third ball is time, which bounces much more wildly than any of us would like to believe. The time is 5 a.m. You know this because there's a battery-powered clock on your bedroom wall that ticks so loudly you sometimes have to smother it with a pillow. And yet, while it's 5 in the morning here, it's also 5 in the evening somewhere in China, proving that incompatible truths make perfect sense when seen with a global perspective. Your sister sleeps in the next room, and in the room beyond that, your parents. Your dad is snoring. Soon your mom will nudge him enough to make him roll over and the snoring will cease, maybe until dawn. All of this is normal, and there's great comfort in that. Across the street, a neighbor's sprinklers come on, hissing loud enough to drown out the ticking of the clock. You can smell the sprinkler mist through the open window. Mildly chlorinated, heavily fluoridated. Isn't it nice to know that the neighborhood lawns will have healthy teeth? The hiss of the sprinklers is not the sound of snakes. And the painted dolphins on your sister's wall cannot plot deadly schemes. And the scarecrow's eyes do not see. Even so, there are nights where you can't sleep because these things you juggle take all of your concentration. You fear that one ball might drop, and then what? You don't dare imagine beyond that moment because waiting in that moment is the captain. He's patient, and he waits. Always. Even before there was a ship, there was the captain. This journey began with him. You suspect it will end with him. And everything between is the powdery meal of windmills that might be giants grinding bones to make their bread. Tread lightly or you'll wake them. Chapter 34. Chapter 22. The mattress didn't save him. My family and I go to Las Vegas for 2 days while they tent our house for termites. I draw on my sketch pad for the whole drive and get carsick, one step short of vomiting, which I suppose makes me like everyone else in Vegas. Our hotel is a 30-story pyramid with diagonal elevators. Las Vegans are very proud of their elevators. The glass ones, the mirrored ones, the ones with chandeliers that quiver and tinkle like each rise and fall is a tremor. The hotels are all in competition to see who can get their guests from their rooms to the casino faster. One hotel even has slot machines in the elevators for the people who can't wait that long. I'm nervous for no reason that I can figure. You need to eat, Mom tells me. I eat and it doesn't go away. You need a nap, Dad tells me, like I'm a toddler. But it's not that either, and they both know it. You need to get over this social anxiety, Caden, they tell me more than once. The thing is, I never had social anxiety before. I was always pretty confident and outgoing. They don't know, I don't even know yet, that this is the start of something bigger. It's just the dark tip of a much larger, much deeper, much blacker pyramid. My parents spend half a day gambling until they decided they've lost enough money. Then they argue and blame each other. You don't know how to play blackjack. I told you I prefer roulette. Everyone needs someone to blame. Married couples blame each other. It's easier that way. The whole thing is aggravated by the fact that Mom broke the left heel of her favorite red shoes and had to limp back to the hotel because walking barefoot on the streets of Las Vegas is not an option. Walking on coals would be less painful. While our parents console themselves with spot treatments, I go out with my sister and walk along the Strip, watching the Bellagio fountain show. I'm kind of bothered to be with Mackenzie right now because she happens to be sucking on her favorite candy, a blue ring pop. It makes her look much younger than almost 11 and makes me feel like I'm a babysitter. It's also embarrassing to be around someone whose entire mouth has turned blue. As we walk, I collect business cards for escort services from sleazy guys, handing them out to anyone who will take them. Not that I intend to call the numbers on the cards, but it's something to collect, like baseball cards, except these have pictures of girls in underwear, worth an entire major league team. I know that one of these buildings on the Strip used to be the MGM Grand, which had a deadly fire a long time ago. It was such bad karma the company sold it to some other hotel chain and built a new hotel, a massive green Oz-like gambling cathedral. But the old hotel is now camouflaged by a different name. A lot of people died in that fire. One guy jumped out of a high window on a mattress to escape the flames. The mattress didn't save him. Now I get to thinking about our hotel and what would happen if it caught on fire. How would you get out of a flaming glass pyramid where the windows don't open? My thoughts start spinning. What if one of these scummy guys in the street decides he's tired of handing out dirty business cards and decides that a little arson is in order? And when I look at one of them, really look at him, I see it in his face and I know that he's the one. I've gotten a powerful premonition, almost like a voice telling me I can't go back to our hotel because he's watching me. Because maybe they all are. Maybe all those sleazy card hander outers are working together and I can't go back to our hotel because if I do, it'll be true. So I convince my sister, who's whining that her feet hurt, to keep on walking, but I don't tell her why. I suddenly feel like it's all up to me to protect her from the creeps. Let's check out Caesar's Palace, I tell Mackenzie. It's supposed to be real cool. As we walk in, I begin to feel a little safer. There are huge stone centurions with spears wearing armor guarding the entrance. I know they're just for decoration, but they make me feel safe from all the scheming, scuzzy fire starters. Inside, among the shops that push perfume, diamonds, leather, and mink, there's an alcove where one more stone sculpture stands. It's a perfect marble replica of Michelangelo's David. Everything in Las Vegas is a perfect replica. The Eiffel Tower, the Statue of Liberty, half the city of Venice. The real world made fake for your amusement. Ew, what's with the naked guy? Mackenzie asks. Don't be dumb, it's David. Oh, she says, and mercifully doesn't ask, David who? Instead she asks, what's that in his hand? A slingshot. Doesn't look like a slingshot. It's a biblical slingshot, I tell her, the one he used to kill Goliath. Oh, Mackenzie says, can we go now? In a second. I can't leave yet because I'm struck by David's stone eyes. His body seems relaxed, like the kingdom is already his, but the expression on his face, it's full of worry and concern he's trying to hide. I begin to wonder if David was like me, seeing monsters everywhere and realizing there aren't enough slingshots in the world to get rid of them. Chapter 41, page 73. Nothing of interest. I know I should hate the captain with all my heart, and yet I don't. I can't explain why. The reason must go as deep as the trench we sailed toward. It must hide in a place that no light can reach except for the light you bring with you. And right now I feel pretty much in the dark. I peer off the side of the ship, pondering the depths, wondering what unknowable mysteries lie beneath us. When I look at the roiling sea long enough, I see things in the randomness of the waves. There are eyes everywhere in those waters scrutinizing me, judging me. The parrot is watching too. He struts along the railing toward me. Look into the abyss and the abyss looks into you, the parrot says. Let's hope the abyss finds nothing of interest. In spite of the captain's disdain of the crow's nest, I still make the climb twice a day to have my cocktail and commune with my fellow crewmen, although few of them are social once their potion is in hand. Today the sea is a roller coaster doing everything short of corkscrews and loops, and the ship's rolling motion is always worst in the crow's nest, which pitches to and fro atop the main mast like a weighted tip of a metronome. Even as I try to hold my drink steady, it sloshes within the glass, spilling a little bit on the ground, where it flows into the dark spaces between the planks and disappears. It's alive, you know, says the master-at-arms, a seasoned crewman in charge of the cannon, with unpleasant tattoos up and down his arms. It's alive and waits to be fed. I then realize that the voice isn't coming from his mouth, but from one of the skulls inked on his arm, the one with dice for eyes. What's alive? I ask the tattoo. The ship? The skull shakes its head. The dark sludge that holds the ship together. It's just caulking, I tell it, and that makes all the other skulls begin to laugh. Keep telling yourself that, says the dice-eyed skull, but when you wake up with a few less toes, you'll know it's been tasting you. Chapter 49, Don't You Want a Whopper? I fill the empty neighborhood streets with my presence. It's a Saturday during spring break, so I have all the time in the world. I'm going to see a movie with my friends this afternoon, but I have the morning to walk. Today, I start a game. The signs I see will tell me what to do. Left turn only. I make a sharp left turn and cross the street. Don't walk. I cease walking and count to 10 before moving again. 15-minute zone. I sit on the curb for 15 minutes, challenging myself to keep still for that long. The road signs become too repetitive, so I expand to other things. An advertisement on a bus stop says, "Don't you want a Whopper?" I don't, but I walk to the nearest Burger King and I get one anyway. Can't remember if I eat it or not. I may have just left it there. Time to upgrade. Visit your neighborhood Verizon store today. The nearest one is pretty far away, but I make the trek and have the clerk spend 20 minutes trying to sell me on a phone I have no intention of buying. There are so many signs out there. I'm out until the sun sets. I never make it to the movies. I can't recall when it stops being a game. I can't recall when I begin to believe that the signs are giving me instructions. Chapter 71, A Worse Enemy. I awake to find the parrot watching me from the foot of my bed. I gasp. He hops closer. I can feel sharp claws on my chest. He doesn't dig his talons in, though. He just gingerly walks across my tattered blanket until his one good eye is looking back and forth between mine. "I am concerned about the captain," he says. Concerned. Why is that my problem? "I am concerned that the captain doesn't have your best interests at heart," he whispers. "Since when do you care about my best interests?" Behind the scenes. I have been your greatest advocate behind the scenes. Why do you think you were in the captain's inner circle? Why do you think you weren't chained to the diving bell when it went down? Because of you? Let's just say I have influence. I don't know whether to believe the bird, but I'm willing to entertain the idea that maybe he's not the enemy, or at least not the worst enemy. Why are you telling me this, I ask? There may be a need to... Then he begins bobbing his head nervously so that his face makes figure eights in front of me. Need to what? He begins to pace on my chest. It tickles. Nasty business. He calms down, is silent for a moment, then meets my left eye with his. If the captain proves unworthy of the crew's trust, I need to know I can count on you. Count on me to do what? Then he puts his beak right up against my ear. To kill him, of course. Chapter 73, The Honors. The captain calls me into his study, just him and me. The parrot is nowhere to be seen. Last I saw, the parrot was down in the galley, hopping from shoulder to shoulder, peering in sailors' ears to make sure they still had brains. Now the parrot winks at me any time he sees me to remind me of our secret conversation. "Do you trust me, Caden?" the captain asks. If I lie, he'll know, so I tell him the truth. "No," I say. My answer makes him smile. "Good boy. That means you're learning. I'm proud of you. More proud than you could know." That throws me for a loop. "I thought you hated me." "Far from it," he says. "The trials I put you through were to burn away the chaff, to purify you. Make no mistake, boy, you are the brightest hope for this mission. All of my hopes are on you." I'm not sure what to say about this. I wonder if he says this to all the crewmen, but somehow I sense that he's sincere. Truth be told, I am greatly concerned about things on my ship, boy. Not the ocean without, but the tides within. Then he leans close. "I know she speaks to you. Calliope, the figurehead. She tells you things that she tells no others. That's proof that you were special, that you were chosen." I don't say a thing, not until I know where this is going. If there are things she knows, you're the one she'll tell. Then I realize that maybe I'm finally in a position to have a little bit of power. If she tells me things, she tells me in confidence. Why should I break that confidence and tell you? "I am your captain." And when I don't respond, he growls and storms back and forth behind his desk. "Or maybe you answer to the parrot." He pounds his fist against the bulkhead. "That mutinous fowl. He sows seeds of sedition among the crew, even as he sits on my shoulder." Then he grabs me and looks at me closely with his good eye, just as the parrot had. "Does Calliope say there'll be a mutiny? Does she say the bird will prevail?" I stay calm. "I'll ask her," I tell him. He is relieved. "Good boy. I knew you were loyal." Then he whispers, "When the time comes, I shall let you do the honors." What honors? He smiles. The honors of killing the parrot. Chapter 95, Windmills of My Mind. How do you explain being there and being here at the same time? It's sort of like those moments when you're thinking about something big that burned itself a powerful memory. Maybe it's the time you scored the winning goal in the playoffs, or maybe it's the time you got hit by a car on your bike. Good or bad, you're bound to relive it in your head now and then, and sometimes after you've gone there, it's a shock to come back. You have to remind yourself that you're not there anymore. Now imagine being like that all the time, never knowing for sure when you're going to be here or there or somewhere in between. The only thing you have for measuring what's real is your mind. So what happens when your mind becomes a pathological liar? There are the voices and visual hallucinations when it's really bad. But being there isn't about voices or seeing things. It's about believing things. Seeing one reality and believing it's something else entirely. Don Quixote, the famous literary madman, fought windmills. People think he saw giants when he looked at them, but those of us who've been there know the truth. He saw windmills, just like everyone else, but he believed they were giants. The scariest thing of all is never knowing what you're suddenly going to believe. And finally, chapter 108, Up or Drown. No matter how rational the world seems to be, you never really know what crazy crap is around the bend. I saw this in the news once. Some socialite in a Manhattan high-rise takes an elevator from the penthouse to the basement garage, dropping down 67 floors to get her Mercedes and go to a gallery on Madison Avenue or whatever it is that Manhattan socialites do with their time. What she doesn't know is that a water main burst just a few minutes ago next to her building. So the elevator reaches the basement, and as the doors begin to open, the elevator is flooded by freezing water. What is she going to do? There isn't even a worst-case scenario for this, because it's beyond anyone's imagination. In 5 seconds, the water's at her waist, then at her neck, and then she drowns, never knowing what the hell happened, or how such a horrific thing is even possible. I mean, think about it. Drowning in an elevator in a skyscraper. That's wrong on 67 different levels. The weird thing is, hearing stories like this makes me feel a kind of kinship with the Almighty, because it proves that even God has psychotic episodes. Thank you. So I'd like to open it up to any questions that you might have. I know that some of you might have read some of my other books. We can talk about those, and I'm happy to talk more about Challenger Deep. Anything that you'd like to know about? Yes?
Does your son still draw?
My son still draws, and he writes, and he's actually has been on tour with me for part of my book tour, and he's been on panels with me. We were at the LA Times Festival of Books last week, and he was on a panel with me, and he signs his artwork that's in the book and also signs the book with me. It's been a really very positive experience for him because people come up to us and just thank us for having written the book, thank him. You know, they come around the table and they just want to give him a big hug. So it's been really positive for him. And yes, he still draws and he writes, and he's my hero. Any other questions? Yes?
What was the biggest challenge in writing Challenger Deep?
The biggest challenge in this book was trying to be true to the story and make sure that Brendan was okay with it. Because we really are putting out there some real stuff, and it's a little bit scary. The challenge was to make sure that I did it in a sensitive way. I wanted to make sure that it was in no way exploitative, and that it wasn't about me wanting to tell a story. It was about trying to put something out there in the world that is going to help the cause of mental illness. So really trying to hit it right, that it did no damage to our family and my son, and that it helped people. I think that was the challenge. The writing of it, you know, if I had been writing it, if I could have written it during the time when things were bad, it would have been extremely painful. You know, I wouldn't even have attempted it. Afterwards, though, it was actually very cathartic and therapeutic to go back and look at this and try to make sense out of everything that happened, and try to see the world through the eyes of mental illness. people will say, wasn't it difficult to write? It was difficult to write, but each time I felt that I got something right, I felt that there was a sense of release and relief about that. Mm-hmm.
What was his reaction to the book?
His reaction to the book was very positive. He read the first draft and he gave me notes, just like my editor would give me, and I incorporated his notes into the book. And I told him from the very beginning that his voice needs to come through in this because I don't want to do anything that is not involving him. And he was very good about it, and was very excited about the book, and all the success the book has been getting has been great. He even did a blog for HarperCollins featuring his artwork and talking about what his impressions of his own artwork are. So it's really been a very positive thing for him from the beginning through the entire process. And it was a little scary because I didn't know if that was going to be the case. And if at any point in the process he said, "Dad, I don't want you to write this book," I would have stopped. But he never said that. Right, does anybody have anything else that they'd like to ask?
Well, I'll ask more questions.
Mm-hmm.
So the stories you were telling in those chapters, were those based on your son's paranoia, specific incidents that he shared with you?
The incidents that I read were specific incidences. There are quite a few of the specific ones in the book. The Las Vegas one was not. But things like that happened. The walking through the streets and thinking that the signs were telling him what to do, that was real. And there were quite a lot of things that happened that are in the books, and a lot of ones that aren't as well. I didn't put everything in, but I just picked the ones that were kind of representative and really followed and took the character, in increasing paranoia and increasing delusions until.
Do you know what they were because he shared them at the time, or because he shared them after?
He shared them at the time. I mean, we knew what was happening at the time that it was happening. There's one chapter where he leaves the house and goes walking in the middle of the night, and I went out and I followed him in my car because we couldn't stop him from going. We couldn't lock him in his room, and so I followed him for hours until he finally came home. And that was, I think, the day before we were able to get him to the hospital and hospitalized.
So you mentioned before you did the readings that he had many diagnoses, and what do you think, given your experience and given the experiences a lot of other people have with that, should doctors refrain from labeling illness or talk? Do you have a thought? Do you have any thoughts about that? I don't even know how to ask, really.
I see what you're saying, that should doctors refrain from putting labels on.
Because then parents think there's a cure, and when there's a label. Or
I think every doctor thinks about it differently. I know none of the doctors really wanted to. Every single one of them hemmed and hawed about the diagnosis, and I think that's indicative of the fact that I'm giving this diagnosis, but just because I got to call it something, but we don't. But it also has elements of other things as well. And I've heard that from a lot of other people that there's a spectrum of mental illness, and it's all the edges are blurry and fuzzy, and nobody fits into the box. And when we start to think that people do, then we start to define them by that mental illness. Like I hate people saying the expression like, "Oh, that person's a schizophrenic," as if a schizophrenic is a thing. A person who suffers from schizophrenia may also suffer from bipolar, may also, the diagnosis may change over time. But just because they have the illness doesn't mean that they're in that box forever. Challenger Deep is very different from my other books, but actually all my books are different. I tend not to write the same thing over and over again. My most successful book series is the Unwind book series, which is now it would be called teen dystopia, but when I wrote it, there was no teen dystopia genre. It was one of the books that along with the Hunger Games, sort of generated the teen dystopia genre, about a society in which teenagers that are unwanted or used for their body parts But it's not about that. It's about the idea that society has made this decision, because the rule is that 100% of them has to be used, and it has to be done in a painless process. So society ends up with this moral and ethical loophole, because if 100% of you is alive, then society can say, well, you're still alive, just in a divided state. And that sort of becomes the moral and ethical loophole that society uses to justify saying that this is okay, that we can take these kids that nobody wants and do this to them. Stories about 3 teens who are trying to survive to 18, because once they turn 18, they become citizens, they become adults, they can't be unwound anymore. And they have to face this question, well, what does it mean about me if society has told me I'm not worth the sum of my parts? And so it poses a lot of questions about society. It's not really about a future society, it's about the way our society makes decisions. And the idea really came when I saw this article about feral teens in England. And the problem there has gotten so bad that people are afraid to go out of their homes in certain neighborhoods for fear of these bands of their neighborhood teenagers. But there was a movement in these neighborhoods, people were actually saying, we need to pass a law that allows us to do away with these kids like pigeons. We need to get rid of them. Nobody wants them, nobody needs them, they never should have been born to begin with. Their parents have thrown them out, let's get rid of them. And I thought, if someone passed a law saying you could do that, would people really take advantage of that? Just because a law was passed, would people then abdicate their own moral responsibility and say, yeah, it's okay, there's a law that says we can do it? So I started thinking about that, and then I saw an article about transplant technology and how they say they're going to be able to use 100% of a body in transplant. And that sort of just got my mind going, and to sort of put those things together and came up with Unwind, which is a 4-book series, and it's become my most successful series. Now it's in development as a movie. And there's interest in Challenger Deep as a movie now too, so keep your fingers crossed on that. They don't want to just sell it to a studio, though. They want to get a they want to get a director with vision attached to it, because I think this book needs to be handled by somebody who does have that sort of an auteur who could really bring something to it. So I'm hoping that it'll get done, and it'll get done well. So one more question?
So what advice would you offer parents or anyone going through this kind of situation in the sense of mental illness or anything like that? What resources really helped you? Or
there are tons of resources. I mean, NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, is one. The National Institute of Mental Health. There's so many. In the back of the book, it actually lists a bunch of resources that you can go to. So there's an awful lot of different organizations, and also don't deny. One of the biggest problems is people just so frightened of it and so troubled by it that they would rather pretend that their kid is okay than accept the fact that they might be mentally ill, because there's such a stigma to mental illness. And I'm hoping that by opening a dialogue, we can take away that stigma. There is nothing shameful about mental illness. It's not something that it's not something you can say snap out of. You don't go to a cancer patient and say snap out of it, but yet we do things like that to people who are mentally ill. We need to change the way we look at it, because it is an illness, it is a disease, and we need to deal with it in a much more effective way, a much more compassionate way. 1 out of every 3 American families faces mental illness in one form or another, but yet you'd never know it because people don't talk about it. When we first started talking about it, people started coming out of everywhere telling me, this happened to my daughter, or my mother suffers from this, or my brother does. And people who we knew, we had no idea that this was going on in their family, because people are so quiet about it. We need to lift that stigma and talk about it more openly. And hopefully through that, we'll start to get help for the people who need it, and acceptance. Yes?
How's your son doing, and what's his prognosis?
His prognosis is that he has a bright future ahead of him. He is 26, he is in film school, he is getting his degree next year. He has been asymptomatic for 4 years. He's on medication, and as long as he takes his medication regularly, he has no issues. And he's managing his illness. We know that when he stops taking the medication, or if he has things that are very, very stressful in his life, it starts to come back. But anytime it does, there's support, and we work with him, and we sort of balance things for him. But he's out on his own. He's living on his own, and doing remarkably well. And we hope it's going to be that way for the rest of his life.
Well, you'd be happy to hear there's a conference this week down at the University of Miami called Stop the Stigma. That's sponsored by the local NAMI chapter in the University of Miami.
Excellent. When is that?
This Saturday.
This Saturday. Stop the Stigma, sponsored by NAMI. That is excellent.
And Pete Early is speaking, the author of the book Crazy. I don't know if you're aware of that book. And Ellen Sachs and a number of the faculty members at the university.
Well, that's wonderful. We need more events like that.
Title for the
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
All right, for all of you on the internet, if you'd like to order the book, just give us a call and we'll ship it to you wherever you're at. And alrighty, thank you and have a great night.